I think a lot, you think a lot. For a bunch of us, we know what it's like to be in our own head. And if you're someone that cares a lot about personal growth, you probably know what it's like to be really introspective and self-aware, which is usually great up to a certain point. Overthinking is one of those problems that seem really simple at first, but in reality is pretty complicated to figure out. And if you know what I mean, you're definitely not alone. According to a study by U Michigan, turns out 73% of young adults aged 25 to 35 experience signs of overthinking, which is a huge number. Honestly, so much more than I thought. So then what does overthinking mean exactly? My favorite definition I saw online was actually from a place called GoodRx Health. And the way they define it is when your thoughts and worries circle in an endless loop and when you dwell on the same thing repeatedly to the point that it disrupts your life. I like how concrete they are with the endless loop part because some of us know exactly what it means to go into this negative thought spiral where it feels like you're just kind of falling to this pit of unhealthy thoughts, but just can't stop for some reason. And some other common signs of overthinking that I also found online are imagining worst case scenarios constantly, being unable to move on to the next issue, thinking about a situation where you've already identified a plausible solution, repeatedly replaying something negative from your past, fixating on things outside of your control. The list goes on. And maybe you already know what it's like to feel some of these things, but the interesting part is it really does seem like most of the issues associated with overthinking never actually stem from the situation itself, but more so from your mind. So today I want to talk about some really useful tips and strategies that can help you beat overthinking, control your mind, and cut off that negative thought spiral before it even starts. All right, let's go. Something interesting after doing a bunch of research is that it turns out when we start overthinking, it doesn't usually start with the overthinking. It starts when we're thinking about just a regular problem in our life. Maybe it's something simple like how you forgot to take out the trash again, or maybe how you panicked and said something you didn't mean to say to that new person you just met, or maybe you lost your keys for like the third time that week. Really, it's any present problem you're confronted with, right? And what happens is it kind of triggers this negative thought spiral. It's like we hopped on a train that just won't stop. And all of a sudden, these tangential problems start appearing. Thoughts like, why do I always lose things? How many times did I lose my keys this week? Do other people lose things this often? Overthinking becomes a problem when you start dwelling on something repeatedly for no reason. And actually, one of the first things you can do is recognize that 99% of the harm is actually caused by you in your own head, and that 1% is actually caused by reality. Most of the time, the problem isn't the real problem. The way you think about it is. And I think this is the key here, because once you recognize that you're overthinking about something, it becomes much easier to cut off that negative thought spiral and just hop off that thought train. I saw this really great quote online. Overthinking is the art of creating problems that don't exist. Really understanding that your mind has just gotten used to creating all these unnecessary worries is sort of the prerequisite to learn how to stop overthinking as a bad habit. And actually, the truth that our minds won't accept in that one moment when we're overthinking is that accepting that these problems aren't actually going to be solved with more thinking. Sure, sometimes there's moments when there's a really complicated problem and yeah, you need to think very logically and quite hard to get through to the solution. But when it comes to overthinking, you're not just thinking through one problem. You're actually creating a bunch of new ones without ever solving the real one. And everyone's different, but it's probably true that you'll find most answers you're looking for given more time and having a clear mind. It sounds counterproductive, but if you know you can't solve a problem in your current state, sometimes it's better to just stop trying and circle back when you're ready for it. Maybe you just need more information or just more time to process everything first. Okay, so maybe it's just me, but a lot of times when I start overthinking, I find myself unable to accept some things about the current reality. Like I'll think to myself, how do I make sure this never happens again? Or something similar, right? And I don't know about you, but when I get into this state, I just get so anxious. And that anxiety just makes me want to think about this problem and solve it even more. It's just a terrible cycle. And after digging online, it turns out it's also not just me. From that same study from Michigan, turns out that overthinking is very commonly associated with symptoms of anxiety and depression. All right, yeah, well, maybe some of us already know that, but what do we do about it? Well, we can first start by understanding that no amount of overthinking and anxiety is going to change your future, and no amount will change your past. A huge part of this is just having a lot more self-trust and acceptance. Acceptance of imperfection, acceptance of uncertainty. Knowing to first accept the nature of these issues really helps us to avoid the tendency of slipping into overthinking in the first place. It's preventative, and by practicing this acceptance, we can start to see things as they really are, hopefully without creating more problems that don't actually exist. And similar to all this is learning how to accept the truth of the present and really believing that the only problem we have to figure out right now is the one right in front of us. Here's the thing, you're not going to overthink your way to a better future. You're not going to overthink your way to a better past. past. All you have is now. And by being in the present, it actually makes it 10 times easier to understand your current thoughts and thought process. Some really good questions you can ask yourself when it gets to this point to help you stop overthinking are questions like, which of my thoughts are helpful and which aren't? Am I thinking about the problem in a helpful way? Am I trying to find an easy solution that doesn't exist? Or is it time for a different approach? Knowing that you can only do your very best with the information you have is a great way of staying grounded instead of seeing those unhelpful thoughts again and again. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I know these strategies aren't a cure-all, and they're not meant to be. At the end of the day, overthinking is just a bad habit, a negative thought pattern that your mind has developed. And so, like all bad habits, it'll take conscious effort to stop doing, but also like all bad habits we are trying to get rid of, it does get easier and easier over time and as we keep practicing this. So thanks for sticking till the end, and see you soon.